After working with over hundreds of students applying to Ivy Leagues, I've noticed something that separates the accepted students from the rejected ones, and it's not what you'd expect. The good news? Once you understand what I'm about to share, you can avoid the same critical mistakes that cost the other students their acceptance letters. But before you spend countless hours on your application or even write a single essay, you need to understand these three crucial areas that could make or break your chances. As someone who got into Harvard and now helps others do the same, what I'm about to share might be uncomfortable to hear, but it could save your entire application. So first, let's talk about intellectual curiosity and how so many students misinterpret it during their college application process. If you think intellectual curiosity is about having it all figured out, so knowing exactly what you want to study and connecting all of the dots, well, you're missing the point. Intellectual curiosity is less about having a solidified path and embracing exploration. Colleges are more interested in how you question the world around you, how you evolve, and how you engage with new ideas. It's about being a work in progress. And guess what? That's your strength. The mistake I often see is that students think they have to present themselves as a finished product, and they need to say, like, this is who I am, this is where I'm going to go, and this is the single path I set myself to. But real curiosity doesn't work that way. It's about your journey. The best students are always evolving and open to new experiences. They didn't have everything mapped out at 17, and honestly, I didn't know what I was doing at 17 either. Successful students are open to growth, exploration, and change. Admission officers aren't looking for the final version of yourself. They're looking for someone who's willing to ask questions and explore new ideas. I remember going through my own Harvard application process, and at one point, I had to confront the idea of being unfinished. Honestly, I didn't have all of the answers to my life. But what I did have was a deep curiosity about learning, a willingness to explore new fields, and an eagerness to grow. I was still figuring things out, and that authentic growth and exploration became one of the strongest parts of my application. Think about it like this. If you present yourself as too complete, it signals a lack of curiosity. You're essentially telling the school, I'm done growing, and that isn't exactly the mindset that they're looking for in a dynamic learning environment. Instead, show the admissions committee your evolution, what sparked your curiosity, what you've discovered so far, and how you plan to keep growing. That is what they want to see. So now that we've defined that intellectual curiosity as a work in progress is a strength, let's talk about how you can incorporate it in your application. First, demonstrate self-directed learning beyond the classroom. Think about the subjects you're passionate about and how you've explored them beyond your coursework. Did you take an online class on a subject that excites you? Or maybe you spent hours watching TED Talks or reading books about a topic you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in how you can transform education for neurodivergent individuals, but your school doesn't offer any courses on that. Instead of just letting it go, you can self-study, watch documentaries on that topic, or engage in conversations. Colleges love seeing that you're self-driven in your learning. Second, explore connections between different interests. Curiosity thrives whenever you start drawing connections between different ideas. Maybe you're into psychology, but you also love creative writing. Instead of keeping those interests separate, explore how they could intersect. You could create a series of creative pieces that explore psychological themes, or maybe you would start a blog or research project that intersects these ideas. For example, one of my students loved biology and art. Rather than keeping them as two completely separate passions, she started a project where she illustrated complex biological ideas to help explain them to younger students. By showing how different fields interact, you demonstrate intellectual curiosity and show that you can think critically about how ideas overlap. And then third is showing evolution of interests over time. Colleges want to see that your interests are not static, but they continue to evolve as you also grow. It's completely okay if your path has not been linear. A great example of this is one of my students, Zir, who was recently accepted into Johns Hopkins University. She initially became interested in mental health because of a personal family experience. Her early curiosity was rooted in trying to understand a family member's struggle, but as she continued her exploration, it became clear that her curiosity extended to psychology as a whole. This eventually led her to volunteer with a program where she worked with children with autism. So her curiosity expanded and evolved from one personal experience to a broader community-driven commitment to help others in need. Admission officers love to see that journey, how one interest evolves into another and how your passion continues to grow more as you dive deeper. So Zir is a perfect example of someone who's embraced intellectual curiosity as a work in progress. Rather than sticking to one narrow view of psychology, she explored different angles. She went from self-researching mental health to organizing school events and initiatives that could help other people in her community. She was never afraid to expand her interest or change courses as she learned more, and that's exactly what made her story compelling. Zira demonstrated that she wasn't just curious, but she was actively shaping her future. And that's exactly what colleges are looking for. They're looking for students who aren't afraid to be unfinished, but who are constantly evolved, learning, and growing. So embrace your unfinished story and show that curiosity drives everything that you do. You're not just applying to college for what you've done, you're applying for what you're ready to become. But understanding curiosity isn't enough if you can't present it authentically. The true power lies in how you frame your experiences and activities, so you not only want to provide context to what you've done, but why it matters to your overall growth. And that's where the next step comes in. Understanding how to give context to your activities to demonstrate not just participation, but meaningful impact. So let's go ahead and talk about something that trips up a lot of students. The idea that you need to have impressive activities to stand out. It's pretty easy to get caught up in the thinking that if you have the right internship, start a nonprofit, or land a high-profile internship, you're going to stand out to admission officers. But the reality is that it's not just about the activity itself, but it's how you frame the story behind it. It's about context, and that's what makes the difference between being just another applicant and someone who's truly unique. So many students just focus on the prestige of their activities and chase what they think will look good on paper. But what most students don't realize is that colleges care more about the context than the prestige. They want to know why you chose those activities, why they reflect your values, and what they say about your growth. For example, whenever I applied to college, my activities didn't scream prestigious. I didn't have a million big-name internships or volunteer at large organizations. What I did have, though, was a powerful personal story that shaped the activities I chose. My mom was diagnosed with cancer at a young age, and so I quickly found myself single-handedly raising my sister and then taking on the responsibilities to hold our home together. After my mother passed away and I processed through the grief, these circumstances framed everything that I did in high school. I wasn't just drawn to any random club or activity. I sought out ways to explore cancer research, mentor younger students like I did with my sister, and ultimately just use my experiences to help others. These activities weren't really impressive in a conventional sense, but they tied to my story and my context. And that context of my personal challenges and family responsibilities is what made these activities meaningful. So how do admission officers actually evaluate your activities? This is how they identify authenticity. First, they look at community resources and limitations. Not all students have access to elite resources, and that's perfectly okay. Admission officers completely understand that, so what they want to see is that you've been able to be resourceful with the opportunities and resources that you do have. Take me as an example. I didn't have a fancy cancer research lab, but I found alternative sources. I remember spending hours scrolling through the internet, reading online articles, looking through public research journals, and cold emailing professors who could potentially mentor me. I didn't let the limitations of my situation hold me back. I just worked with what I had, and then I turned it into a meaningful pursuit. This is the kind of resourcefulness that colleges value. Second, colleges look at personal circumstances. In my case, helping raise my younger sister and caring for my mother as she went through her cancer treatment eventually framed everything that I did in high school. I didn't just do cancer research because I thought it would look impressive to colleges. My cancer research came from a personal place. I wanted to understand it better because it directly affected my childhood. Similarly, I got involved in mentoring younger students in the clubs I was in, such as Model United Nations, because I understood what it felt like to need support, and I wanted to help other people like my younger sister realize their full potential. So I didn't just sign up to be a mentor. I chose it because I knew the value of guidance whenever life gets overwhelming. My experience, although they were challenging, shaped everything I did. And then third, college admission officers look for natural progression and involvement. It's not about being busy with a bunch of things, but it's more so about showing commitment and progress. My journey into cancer research didn't just start with a prestigious internship. It started with self-driven learning and desire to understand something that actually affected my family. Over time, this did lead to more formal research, and eventually I was nominated for publication in an undergraduate research journal. This progression isn't about starting from scratch, but evolving in the activities that you genuinely care about. So I want to give you another great example about why context matters. Last week, actually, I was talking to a Dartmouth admissions officer who shared a story about a student who worked at their local library. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a very simple or mundane activity. But here's where the context makes all the difference. This student came from a low-income family and didn't have access to the same resources that other students might have had. So she basically spent her entire childhood going to the library 24/7 because that's all she had access to. But instead of letting that hold her back, she used her position to help others. She began tutoring kids at the library who didn't have access to a private education, and she also began organizing community events to help increase accessibility to people who didn't have educational materials. So what made her activity stand out wasn't the prestige of the library. It was the impact the student was making in her community given her context. So her story was unique and made her stand out not because she had a flashy internship, but because of the context behind it. She was serving her community, being resourceful, and that's what made her activity meaningful. Now let's go ahead and talk about a huge mistake that so many students make whenever they're applying to college: trying to show everything. It's easy to think that you need to list all of your awards and mention every single extracurricular you've been involved in. But the truth is, if you try to show everything, you risk standing out for nothing. The key is to focus on your standout quality, the one thing that defines you and your growth. And trust me, it's better to be remembered for one thing than be forgotten for everything. What I see all the time is that students are trying to prove that they're well-rounded, so they list every single extracurricular activity and achievement, hoping that at least one will stick out. But the truth is, this approach actually weakens your application. Colleges are reading hundreds of applications a day. They don't have the time to read into every single detail of your resume. When you try to show everything, you don't give admission officers a clear picture of who you are. You actually end up diluting your message and being just another student on the pile of applications they already have. And if your application is full of all different kinds of experiences without a clear narrative or value-based theme, you risk losing your application. Whenever I was applying to Harvard, I was just like every other student. I wanted to show all of my activities and highlight all of my achievements. But then I realized something. There's no way for admission officers to connect the dots if I try to show everything and not connect it to an overall theme. So I had to narrow it down. I wanted my application to reflect who I was at the core. And it became clear that my standout quality wasn't about the things that I'd done. It was actually about my natural desire to nurture and give back. And this desire came from single-handedly raising my sister while my mom was battling cancer. This became the driving force behind my activities in high school, from mentoring to leadership roles. And it wasn't just something that I did for my resume, but it was actually who I am. I realized that if I could thread this theme throughout my application, it would give admission officers a clear picture of who I was. I wasn't just a collection of activities, but a real person with a core value that drove every single experience. And the reason why having a standout quality matters is because of the reality of how applications are reviewed. Admission officers read 3 to 4 applications an hour. That's only about 15 minutes per application. You don't have a long time to grab their attention, and so that's why having a focused narrative is essential. If you try to show everything that you've done, your application will get lost. But if you have one clear standout quality and you thread it throughout your essays, extracurricular activities, interview, etc., then you'll give admission officers something to memorize. But if you focus on one standout quality and you thread it throughout your supplemental essays, extracurriculars, personal statement, then you give admission officers something memorable to hold on to. They need to see a clear theme, something that sticks with them as they go through hundreds of other applications. So how do you actually identify that standout quality? First, reflect on your core values. Think about the things that have consistently driven you. What values have you carried with you throughout high school? For me, it was nurturing. I found purpose in helping others, especially through difficult times. And this wasn't just about one specific event. I realized that it was a natural part of me, something that was embedded throughout my childhood. So take a step back and think. What is one quality or value that defines how you approach tackling challenges, leadership, and helping others? Second, look at your patterns of involvement. Your activities and interests are clues to your standout quality. What themes keep emerging? If you've been involved in mentoring across multiple clubs, this could point to a natural leadership quality or desire to help others grow. Or maybe you've worked on projects that involve creating solutions. This could indicate innovation or passion for problem solving. Go through activities and look for patterns. What do they tell you about the kind of person you are? And then third, just ask yourself, what makes me different? What do you bring to the table that's different from other students, and given your context, background, and upbringing? Maybe you face significant challenges that have shaped how you view the world. Or maybe your interests diverge from what's typical of your peers. So for example, again, my standout quality was that natural ability to nurture others, and this stemmed from my responsibility of raising my sister. And although that was in my childhood, it has since continued to shape the way that I become involved in the things that I'm passionate about and how I perceive my role and my relationship with others. Now, once you identify your standout quality, the next step is to thread it throughout your entire application, and here's how to do that. First, your personal statement is your chance to showcase the personal quality in full. For example, one of my students, Zoe, who was recently accepted into Rice University for the Early Decision 2 cycle, didn't try to showcase every single activity she was involved in. Instead, she highlighted how her personal journey shaped her interest in problem solving and working in underserved communities. By focusing on one theme, Zoe presented a coherent narrative that connected her activities to her personal growth. Second, whenever it comes to your extracurriculars, the top few extracurriculars that you list should highlight your standout quality. For example, if you're passionate about helping others, focus on listing activities first that highlight impact in that area. So I'm going to take an example from the student that I just mentioned. Whenever I worked with her, her standout quality really revolved around community engagement and problem solving. So in her application, on one hand, we made sure to focus and highlight the work she'd done volunteering at a soup kitchen and also a local library. And on the other hand, we highlighted her problem-solving roles, conducting independent research, integrating AI in healthcare. And this also just spoke to her passion for social change. Third, ask your recommenders to highlight your standout quality. They can talk about how this quality showed up in their experiences with you, whether in school projects, leadership roles, or mentorship. By making sure that your standout quality is also in your letters of recommendation, this creates a coherent narrative across your entire application. And I'll give you guys a little bit of insight into the overall admissions process, but like I stated before, admission officers only have limited time to read your application. And then whenever it comes to the subcommittee review stage of the application process, essentially an admission officer will serve as your applicant, and they only have a couple of minutes to present your case. So that's why it's so important to have a standout quality so admission officers know exactly who you are and they can present your case concisely. For my student who was recently accepted into Rice, her application was memorable because it wasn't just a list of things that she had done, but it was actually a clear and focused narrative that showed her commitment to making a difference. And that focus was what made her application stand out and allowed admission officers to quickly understand who she was as a person. Understanding these three concepts transformed my application and helped me get into Harvard, but knowing these principles is the first step. If you're serious about getting into an Ivy League school and want to learn exactly how to apply these concepts into your application, click the link in my description to learn more about my Ultimate Ivy League Guide program. I'll personally guide you through implementing these principles in your application strategy, essays, and every single other component. Don't let being overwhelmed hold you back. Click that link in the description and let's transform your Ivy League application together.